Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our event, Women Power, the road to women's empowerment in Korea. My name is Liz Griffin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Australia-Korea Business Council. 여러분, 안녕하세요. 오늘 이 중요한 행사에 참석해 주셔서 감사합니다. 저는 호주 한국경제협력위원회의 대표이사인 Liz Griffin입니다. First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm speaking to you from, the Boon Wurrung people, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. As a quick introduction to the Australia-Korea Business Council, we are a national, member-based organisation that promotes trade and investment between Australia and Korea. We are absolutely delighted to be hosting today's webinar in collaboration with our close partners at the Asia Society Australia. Today's topic is such an important one, and one that is very close to my heart, and I'm sure many of yours as well. In my 3 years living in Korea, I learned firsthand how incredible Korean women are. They are strong, highly educated, independent, hardworking, and very diligent. Some facts that are interesting to note is that Korea has had a female president. Korea also has a Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. 7 of the top 10 women golfers in the world are Korean or from Korean descent. And 4 out of 10 businesses in Korea are owned by a woman. Further, almost 70% of South Koreans aged between 25 and 34 years old have completed some kind of tertiary education, and this is amongst the highest in OECD countries. These facts illustrate the significant role that women play in Korean society, and today we celebrate that and the power of Korean women. However, as with many other countries globally, Korea is searching for ways to reach gender equality, and today's discussion will explore both women power and the road to women's empowerment in Korea. To talk about this topic, we have an exceptional and very diverse panel to help us navigate some of these complex questions, and I look forward to introducing you to them shortly. Before I do, however, I would like to invite Australia's Ambassador for Gender Equality, Julie-Ann Guivarra, to provide an opening statement. Ms. Guivarra, thank you very much for joining us here today, and I'd now like to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Liz. And yes, thanks to the Australia-Korea Business Council and of course the Asia Society Australia for organising this event. I'm absolutely delighted to join the panel discussion on women's road to economic empowerment with you all today. I think it's fair to say that we're all on a journey when it comes to women's economic empowerment, even here in Australia. But it has been a subject, I think, that over the past decade, we've come to really appreciate that when you put the right conditions in place and measures for women's involvement in economic decision-making, you really do pave the way for greater prosperity. And of course, there are really well-known studies on this, of the McKinsey's study called The Power of Parity, Advancing Women's Equality in the Asia Pacific, which was produced in 2018, helped demonstrate that, you know, we could add up to $4.5 trillion to our collective GDP in the region, so which was about 12% above business as usual, you know, if we have women involved in key economic decision making. And that was, of course, pre-COVID. I think, you know, we have seen that our political leaders have really added impetus to this agenda, you know, over the past 5 or 6 years. Of course, we have the G20 Leaders Declaration from Brisbane back in 2014, which established a commitment, of course, to look at reducing the workforce participation gap between men and women in our respective countries by 25% by 2025, of course, taking into account all different circumstances. I think it's really important to think that our leaders didn't do this simply because it was the right thing to do, but rather there are clear economic imperatives and linkages between women's economic empowerment and things like gender equality, poverty reduction, and also inclusive growth. I think what's really challenging now, of course, is that we are seeing COVID-19 have a disproportionate effect on women and girls, and what that might do in terms of, you know, making sure that we continue with sort of the hard-fought gains that we've had on gender equality, you know, over a series of decades. And I think that's something that we really have to be quite, you know, careful and mindful of at this point in time. I think, you know, we should acknowledge there's been absolutely invaluable work done by, you know, our healthcare workers during this time, but 70% of them worldwide are in fact women. We know too from surveys done by organisations like UN Women and also the ILO that women are undertaking a disproportionate amount of unpaid care work, and that has only increased, of course, during this COVID pandemic. And of course, we're seeing unemployment rise in sectors which traditionally employ women. So if you look at the tourism and hospitality sectors, retail, certain types of manufacturing, you know, there is a disproportionate impact on women and girls in those particular areas. And so we really do need to look at ways of ensuring that we continue to promote inclusive and equitable economic growth. And there are some things that we can do. Obviously, at the national level, ensuring that our COVID-19 economic strategies are responsive to women, making sure that there's a really sound evidence base where we have good sex disaggregated data is obviously really important at this stage. You know, and ensuring, as I said at the outset, that we have really meaningful participation by women in the way that we develop our response and risk recovery strategies during this period. But of course, we also have to look at the things which are a bit longer term, which we knew were an issue before. And so here, I guess I'm referring to, you know, the need for us to continue our work to change workplace and social norms and behaviours which discriminate against women. I mean, obviously, we've had the Me Too movement worldwide, and it's really drawn attention to the importance of issues around like addressing workplace harassment. This year in Australia, we had our Australian Human Rights Commission, our Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins, release a report called Respect at Work, which was a national inquiry into workplace sexual harassment. You know, these are really important long-standing issues which we obviously need to address. We should also be looking, obviously, at having more women in leadership in our business community, because we know that diversity in leadership also helps our businesses. And I was really pleased to see that even during this COVID period, there was an excellent bit of research released by our Workplace Gender Equality Agency here in Australia and Curtin University. So the study's called Gender Equity Insights 2020, Delivering the Business Outcomes. And what was really interesting about this was that it found that an increase in the share of top tier female managers by 10 percentage points could lead to about 6.6% increase in the market value of Australian stock exchange listed companies. So it was the equivalent of the value of around $104.7 million worth of added additional value. So I think, you know, these experiences tell us that we really should be focusing a lot more on women's economic empowerment, because there is a good business case behind it. So I really commend, you know, the Asian Society and Australia Korea Business Council for organising this event, because I think it's really important that we all consider at this at this point in time, you know, how we can kind of build back better, you know, after COVID-19. And a critical part of that really will be, you know, how we do more on women's economic empowerment issues. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to participate in your panel. But yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to hearing from the panelists about some of their experiences on these issues today. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those opening remarks. I think the points that you made were so spot on. Women do have a greater role to play in the economy and also in leadership, and also acknowledging the great work that women are doing and the role that we're playing in this COVID-19 crisis as it unfolds. So thank you very much for highlighting those points. And I hope that this event today takes us one step closer to equality and to gender equality, and recognising the important role that women play. So thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce the panel, and I do note that the full bios of each of our speakers are on both the AKBC's website and also Asia Society's website. Our first panellist is Miss Frances Cha, author of this fantastic novel, If I Had Your Face, and Frances is joining us from Seoul. Frances, you know I am a huge fan of your book, and I highly recommend it to everybody on this call. As a quick synopsis, this is a fictional novel that follows the story of 4 different Korean women's perspectives in modern day Seoul, and covers a whole range of themes from Korean beauty, sexism, wealth, competitiveness, even mother-in-laws, chaebols, K-pops and K-dramas. Frances is a former travel and culture editor for CNN in Seoul. She's grown up in the US, Hong Kong and Seoul, and she is a graduate of Dartmouth College and Columbia University MFA writing program. We also have Miss Sinjung Kwon, partner at Mazars, and Miss Kwon is joining us from Brisbane today. Miss Kwon has a really interesting perspective because she was born and raised in Korea, but has spent her professional career in Australia. So she understands both Australian and Korean cultures intimately. And lastly, we have Dr. Kyungja Jung, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Technology in Sydney. Dr. Jung has devoted a large portion of her academic career to women's interests in both Korea and Australia. Her areas of research include women's movements, women's policy, North Korean female defectors, sex workers, violence against women, and in particular migrant women's issues. So welcome to all of our panelists, and thank you very much for joining us. Just a note for our attendees, we do have a Q&A function down the bottom of your Zoom screen. So if you would like to ask a question to any of our panelists, please feel free to do so. My first question goes to Dr. Jung. Dr. Jung, the Me Too movement has provided women globally with a platform to speak up about women's issues, gender equality and sexual discrimination. We're also starting to see more discussions and events such as this one here today that are centred around women's rights and gender issues. I wonder if you could comment, please, on the impact of the Me Too movement in Korea and what change, if any, has ensued for women in Korea.
Yep. First of all, we need to acknowledge that before this global Me Too movement started, the figures in South Korea, vigorous women's movement have existed to tackle women's issues, including sexual violence, since mid-1980s. And their efforts have brought to massive changes to legislation, policy, and other programs in Korea. To name a few, you know all 호주제, but the male-headed family register system was abolished, and thanks to the women's movement in Korea, and also legislation related to sexual and family violence were enacted from the early 90s. And the Ministry of Gender Equality, as Liz already mentioned, was set up in 1998. But despite these ongoing efforts and achievements, sexual assault and harassment have been prevalent in every corner of Korean society, including the workplace. So the Me Too movement in Korea, this name started 2018. Again, raised the alarm about sexual assault and harassment, which had been somewhat condemned in the workplace. So through these Me Too campaigns and movement and wrongdoings of male leaders in working in respected areas such as politics, the prosecutor's office, sports, and theater and art entertainment have been exposed to in public. And the major impact also the Me Too campaigns have on women. And I think the first, the ordinary people and women see sexual violence and harassment as a collective experience and crimes rather than personal and unfortunate experiences. And also through these campaigns, the women and all the Korean public learned, we can punish offenders by speaking out, not only through legal process, but through naming, shaming, and like social and cultural punishment. So yeah, overall, the Me Too movement has presented new opportunities for combating sexual harassment in workplace, and also how to design the solutions as to how to prevent, eliminate sexual harassment. And also, more broadly, I found that the movement, the Me Too campaigns, reignited young women's interest in the passion for feminism and feminist activism. So the indifference to women's activism among the young people needs to be understood in Korean social context. So in a neoliberal society with one of the lowest youth unemployment among young people, so young people are more interested in their individual success and employability rather than social change and feminist activism. So instead of doing activism, they need to build their specs by gaining many certificates for foreign languages and extra skills on top of a university degree. But Me Too campaigns and also with the Gangnam the station murder case, and there is a huge megalia and misogyny on online debate. So they reignited women's activism. So we all, seen recently, there is Escape the Corset movement organized by young women, and also the massive street demonstration organized by young women against the spy camp, so the hidden in cameras. So yeah, I better stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jung, and you're right. There have been many other movements before the Me Too movement, such as the Escape the Corset movement, and even the public response to the Gangnam station. I think it was a sexual offence that happened at Gangnam station. That was a huge movement, which demonstrates the voice that Korean women have. So thank you very much. Ms. Kwon, I'd like to bring you in here. As I mentioned in the introduction, you have been raised in Korea, but you've spent a lot of your professional career in Australia. I wondered if you could just provide some comments or some general observations about being a woman in both Australia and Korea, and any differences that you found.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Dr. Jung. The story you share with us was quite amazing, and some stories are quite new to me, and it's good to know the movement in Korea. And yes, I actually born in Korea and grew up there, and I came to Australia. My family immigrated to Australia 20 years ago. I finished my uni here, and I'm in this accounting industry for 20 years. And I'm a partner at Mazars. Just a bit of an introduction of Mazars. Mazars is international accounting firm has 40,000 plus professionals and located in 91 different countries. Yes, some of the observation I have from the, being a woman in 2 countries, I just wish to share my experience and cultural differences. Yeah, I think most of you familiar with the impression ladies first, and the experience I had was that we had a dinner after a serious business discussion, and it was 15 people, and I was the only female. And after the meeting, we went out from the boardroom and waited for the lift. And when lift arrived, and they just doesn't move but didn't move, but they just wait. I'm actually step in the lift first because that's the manner they actually traditionally taught from young age. So that's the manner they show among the formal meetings and polite way. And we went to dinner, a restaurant, and the eldest guy next to me, who came from London, and he just asked me, "Would you sit down?" And I realized everyone is standing and waiting. The person should sit. That was me. I was the female, and it wasn't that comfortable because again I grew up in Korea, and my understanding in Korea, the gentleman first culture. Even I'm talking to expat from Korea recent conversation, and they was exercising ladies first in Australia, but when they went back to Korea, they're actually doing gentlemen first. So they're actually doing a good job in Australia. I don't mean it happen every business life, but I'm talking about formal meetings. And again, the formal meetings, the ladies first still is the way we show the manner. So and second thing I experienced was we had a Zoom meeting with a Korean corporation. And getting into Zoom meeting, you can see the faces here, my face and Liz's face, Dr. Jung and Mr. Cha. You can see their face. But when I went to the Zoom meeting, the ladies, the female staff, their camera was off. Only male's face was shown. And later I was questioned to one of a guy, that was quite weird to me because, this is your meeting. We should see the expression of their face like. And a guy said, and sometimes even the flow chart of HR staff, the female's face is not showing there, only male face is shown. So I don't know that's usual in Korea or not, but that's the thing. They don't show their face on Zoom, and that's quite a weird experience to me. But I'm actually here today as a speaker, represent of women in business. Then in business, actually there's no gentleman first, there's no ladies first. Business is all about money and build an enterprise. So in the business, in business, there's no ladies and gentlemen first. And I like to actually encourage the female audience. And what I often find is the female, they do not feel comfortable when they're actually having a discussion about aggressive fee discussion or introduce a product with fee structures. So the audience here today, if there's anyone working in the service industry or any even any accounting industry or legal industry, you should change your mindset, bring client into and making money. That's what in business. It doesn't matter. It is. Sorry, we're talking about gender equality today, but doesn't matter their background, cultural background, gender background, or religious background. When we're talking about business, it's all about money. You should change your mindset. Liz?
Thanks very much, Ms. Kwon. That's a great and a great note to add, that it doesn't matter
Yeah, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me to be here. And I actually honeymooned in Australia, and it's one of my favorite places. But in writing this book, I've been very fascinated by the different responses from around the world. And this ranges from the West, where the responses have ranged between, "Oh my God, how can this be such a toxic culture and shallow if it's so obsessed with beauty?" Whereas I find that response kind of more reflective of the value systems of the person asking the question, and embedding more bias than was intended, obviously, when I was writing the book, versus some people are reacting and saying it's a very moderate representation, if anything. But the book opens, and that particular quote is taken from in the plastic surgery clinic, where the protagonist, who is a room salon girl, is modeling her face on a K-pop star. And to me, that reflects more of a universal theme of, oh, if we only had something that we don't have, then our life would be perfect. And very, usually, if not always, that's not true. And even if you achieve what you strive for, it doesn't fulfill all your dreams the way that you expected. In terms of beauty and the standards of beauty and the pressures of beauty, it's not as if there are all these kind of pressures being forced down your throat while you're here. It's very subtle, and there's a lot of nuance and context to go with it. But it is true that Korea has the highest plastic surgery per capita in the world. But it's not necessarily just women. Men also have that pressure as well, and men have the highest market share of cosmetics. I think I did an article on that when I was at CNN. But it's more, and Dr. Jung was referencing the accessibility when we were doing a panelist meeting yesterday, but it's a very practical approach to what you think you don't have, and the accessibility of plastic surgery clinics and how easy it is to get an appointment, get a surgery date, that I think is very facilitates your decision-making when you're here. And in terms of standards of beauty, there is a misconception, in my personal opinion, that Korean women go in and try to make their features look very Asian or very Western. When I was doing research for this book, and I went around to various plastic surgery clinics and had posed as a patient and had my face assessed and x-rayed and 3D mapped and everything, what the surgeons were advising were not adhering to Western standards of beauty at all. And so I think that's a misconception in the Western sphere. But again, it's more of a practical application, in my personal opinion, whereas if you're not happy with something, you go and you change it. Versus in the West, there, obviously the value of you should be happy with who you are, you should accept others for what they are, and don't apply this kind of standard of beauty. That is the running value system. But in practical society, you do notice that those who are, the obsession with Hollywood celebrities, obsession with influencers, all of that kind of refute the fact. And you do understand why people make the choices they do. And so in my book, I'm kind of inviting the reader to look at the reasons why people make the choices that they do in regards to plastic surgery and beauty, and kind of bring a more understanding and sympathy and empathy to that decision-making process.
Excellent. Thank you very much for shedding a bit of extra light on some of the novels in your character, some of the characters in your novel, and the context in Korea. Miss Kwon, next question is for you. You're a mother. I wonder if you could make some comments around having your children in Australia, and if you found any differences in terms of maternity leave and any other forms of support in Australia and in Korea.
Thank you, Liz. And I think Liz also recently had a baby, and congratulations for that. And I think she came back from maternity leave, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, that's quite normal, common story for Australian working woman, because the Australian woman, the Australian society, female taking 6 months or 12 months maternity leave when they have a baby. And so this way, many businesses having a program to have women return to the business. Like at senior level, they're organizing a meeting with the return to work female worker, with the client they used to look after, and arrange the flexible hours, and also allow them to work at home. So those kind of stuff, actually, to me, it's quite usual. And in accounting industry, legal industry, or banking industry, the woman number actually more than male. So choosing industry you're going to work, that's also quite important. But anyway, that's personal choice. Yeah. In our office, we have a Sandra who had the second maternity leave 12 months term. She had 12 months maternity leave 2 years ago. And in between, she came back as a part-timer, and now she's having another 12 months annual maternity leave. So to me, that in Australia, that's kind of common thing happen. And the maternity leave in Australia, the length of term is, maximum term is 12 months. And that's unpaid leave. There's no statutory entitlement to paid maternity leave. But Centrelink, the government pays $753.90 per week for 18 weeks. So the company doesn't pay, but the Centrelink pays first 18 months. Korea, I've done a bit of research through the Korea Mazars, and the information also I've got for the Australian bit is Providence HR that's run by Mazars Australia. And Korea, the term of length of maternity leave is 90 days for female and 10 days for male. And it's kind of paid leave. Company pays for that first 60 days. For the small companies, the government supports 200만 won, that's equivalent to 2,300 in Australian dollar per 30 days. And employee gets total wages. So government support, and companies should pay the gap. The big companies first 60 days, a company should pay the total wages they used to get. The last 30 days, government pays, again, 200만 won, that's 2 million won, that's equivalent to 2,300. So comparing two countries, the length is 90 days in Korea, 365 days in Australia. And the paid payment, full 90 days paid by company or government in Korea, and 18 weeks in Australia. And again, I'm in business, so having a female worker who going to pregnant or having a baby, actually that I don't deny that doesn't cost any to company. Actually, that's sometimes costly because there's administrative cost to replace while they're living, and also there's possible chance to lose a client. And however, again, we are talking about equal opportunity to everyone. So the condition the woman work in workforce has to be improved, still need to be improved. And Lisa asked me my experience, and my experience is like that. Even the I can have a maximum length of maternity leave 12 months, but in Australia, the law allowed we can send a baby to childcare as young as 6 weeks old. And I am a good citizen, so I send my 2 boys from 6 weeks to the kindy. And since then, I'll drop them at kindy school at 7 o'clock and pick them up 7 o'clock in the morning, pick them up at 6 o'clock every day. And balancing your life is important. What I like to share again this time, and not having a baby or children is your choice, but having a baby doesn't stop you to succeed in your business. So I encourage you all to think about clear goal in your personal life and also working life. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kwon. It's a great comparison that you've drawn between Australian and Korean parental leave. So thank you very much for that analysis. I'll now go to Frances, or Ms. Cha. As a global trend, more women are choosing not to have children. And this is also true in Korea. And one of your characters in your books, Wonna, is agonizing whether or not to have children. I wonder if you could please help us understand her dilemma while making this decision.
Yeah, I mean, the dilemma of my character Wonna really reflects the dilemma of many people I know who are in the same position. And this is all participated to the lowest birth rate that Korea has. It's below 1. And something that the government really agonizes over and tries to alleviate every year by introducing policies that are supposed to entice women to have more children, which includes things like free childcare, subsidies, like money for each child that you give birth to. Companies, my sister-in-law's company is offering $10,000 cash straight up if you have a child. So there are all these incentives that are being built in, but the fact remains is the landscape still remains very difficult for most youth to fathom having a child. And a lot of it is because like the skyrocketing real estate prices, which every single headline since I've been here for the past 2 months has been, centered around real estate, because it has gotten to the point where, no matter how hard you work and no matter, what a great job you have, it's often the case that you cannot save up enough to buy an apartment. And that means that you can't have a family, and let alone pay for all the childcare that you require, not only because of actual, babysitters, but once they enter school, the Koreans have such a high emphasis on education that the after-school hagwon, which is kind of the private tutoring system that's in place here, that is also exorbitantly expensive. And the Korean way is to kind of sacrifice everything for your child and make sure that they have all the opportunities that they can possibly have. And so if you're not able to provide that, then a lot of the youth are opting out altogether and saying, well, I'm not going to have children. And this is the cause of such great intergenerational anguish between the parents who grew up in a very different landscape, where if you work, you do see, fruits of your labor. Because it was such a developing country at the time, if you work hard, you are able to provide for your family and buy a house. And so this, I think the fact that there are more working households where both the wife and the husband work. I was just listening to a friend kind of confide her troubles to me, that she can't afford a child because she has to work. But once the child enters, for example, first grade, it's a very specific thing, but the kid gets out of school at 2:00, and who will take care of the child until she comes home, which is around 7 or 8. And so that kind of a very specific concern has been, driving down the birth rate. And even within the workplace, even with very, I think, like, compared to the US anyway, the maternity leave policies are quite dramatically good in some respects, but there are those that take advantage of that system and give women a bad name. My uncle was just speaking of an employee that he hired who has not shown up to work since she was hired. She took 2 years each off for 3 kids straight, and then handed in her resignation, and they had to hand her a severance. So it was 6 years of paid maternity leave and severance on top of that. So, from a hiring practice, it's a really like a chicken and an egg problem. So yeah, that's a whole other can of worms, and something that Korea is grappling with. And there's really no solution, as you can see from the way that the government is kind of flip-flopping between policies almost every week to try to address the issues.
Thank you, Ms. Cha, for shedding some of the light onto why Korean women are not choosing to have children, and it's great to see that the Korean government are at least trying to develop some policies to change this. So thank you very much for that insight. Dr. Jung, Korea is home to such a huge pool of talent. In my opening remarks, I mentioned that Korean women are very highly educated, with almost 70% of Korean women having some kind of tertiary education aged between 25 and 34. However, despite this huge achievement in education, only approximately, I think it's 59.4% of Korean women are employed. Could you talk about the value that Korean society places on education, and then how this translates into the workplace?
Yeah. So as we know that the passion in education and high educational attainment among Koreans have been the cornerstone of Korean economic development. So it would be impossible for Korea to achieve this world 11th economy in a short fraction of time after Korean War. So after Korean War, Korea was the poorest country. So when I checked the rate of high school girls going to college, is now surpassing male students. So at the 74% high school girls go to university or the tertiary education, and 65 boys, high school students, male students go to college. So also another more than half of master's degree recipients are women. So women is really educated workforce. So the diversity of the workforce is key to, like, including gender diversity is the key to productivity and innovation. So one piece of research I found that more women-friendly the companies are, the more productive they are, and also the low the turnover rates are. So there are a lot of research evidence, I can say that. So, and like in Korea, women stand out. The many industries such as films, recently sports, and as leaders of small, medium-sized companies. So when you think of a film Parasite, you might remember only Bong Joon-ho, but two women, producer Kwak Si-ne and executive producer Lee Mi-kyung or Mickey Lee, the key driving forces behind the production and the promotion of this film. So yes, as Liz mentioned, given that these talented, highly educated the women and workforces, and still female workforce are underutilized. So I think the reason is the the research indicated there is the pregnancy and childbearing and child rearing experience, and the career breaks because of that. But given that the South Korea has the lowest fertility rate, so I don't think this two provide full answers. So if we will look at the Korean workplace, there is a really long working hours. So when I checked some statistics, I found that their working hours is between 36 to 40 hours, 44 hours per week. So very hard to combine that these long working hours and working environment that are not very flexible, make it somewhat hard for women to combine work and family, in particular after marriage and childbirth. And also one statistics from the 2020 World Economic Forum report, I found that women do 4 times more unpaid work compared to men in South Korea. So unpaid work means house chores, caring work. So this unpaid work and also long working hours, inflexible work environment, that is a bit, discourage the women to back to their work and fully utilize the women's workforce. So there is a long way to achieve gender equality in Korea, although we achieved a lot.
Thank you very much for that, and I couldn't agree more. There's so many benefits to having women in the workforce, as you say, productivity and also entrepreneurship. And that leads quite nicely into my next question, which is about the lead roles that Korean women are taking in some of the K-dramas and films. And I admit I'm in lockdown here in Melbourne, so I've been watching a lot of Korean dramas lately. And I just noticed in particular in Parasite and Crash Landing on You, or Sarang의 불시작, there have been leading the women have taken the protagonist role, but are also very innovative and entrepreneurial. And I wonder if you can just comment on how Korean pop culture is shifting the perception of the role of Korean women. To Mr. Jung?
Yeah, so of course, the culture could or can shape the social reality. But on the other hand, I believe that the cultural product is a reflection of Korean reality. So even when I read this question and I think about my friends, so almost my close high school friends, 3 out of 5, they are business women, like but small, medium business, of course. So the current change, characters and how do they behave within the drama or films. So I just say that is a reflection of the Korea's changed reality. So although I say that still long way to achieve gender equality, but there has been so much change in terms of gender roles. So if even you look at Korean drama, there is no more the rigid gender roles. Sometimes reversal of rigid gender roles represented in the media quite a lot. So yeah, That's my point. So reflection of reality. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We'll now move to the Q&A. I know that we're running out of time. We've just got 10 minutes. But I would like to ask one from Min, who is from Ernst & Young. They've never worked, as I've never worked in Korea and have great interest in women's in the workplace, especially after reading Lead In. I'd like to ask the panelists about what practical ways men can contribute in establishing a stronger female presence in the workplace, regardless of their ranks in an organisation and particularly in Korea. Would anybody like to answer that one?
I mean, I could just take a stab at it because I did work at a Korean company in Korea, which was the basis for one of my characters. But I did see kind of the masculine lead when I was there. And it is a tough question because a lot of it is, I think, like the kind of the taking a back seat is kind of self-imposed from women a lot of time in a corporate setting. So I think just for men to continuously provide more of a platform and carve out more opportunities for women to present more and I guess speak up more and make sure that, you know, in instances such as the one that Ms. Kwon was talking about, maybe insisting that everyone be equally presented, even on Zoom meetings. So, but it was my observation that in a very corporate setting, the women fall silent a lot of the time. I don't know how it is in American culture or in the American workplace because I've only worked in Korea, but I found that to be the most problematic. And if men can kind of facilitate women speaking up more by kind of giving them the floor a lot of the time, I think that would help.
Yeah, and thank you, Ms. Cha, and Dr. Chong, I think you want to add something in there?
Yeah, so when I checked the leadership, represent women's leadership positions in the politics and business, I found that in Korea, women's leadership in senior management in the companies extremely low. So that means still the leaders and senior managers is male dominant. So that will affect the hiring practice and or gender diversity or the diversity of the workforce. So to make this happen, definitely more women or gender diverse people should be in the the managing position in the companies or leading companies, so they can change the these practices.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask one more question, and this is from Chloe Yu, which is about generational differences. And she says, certain values and expectations are placed on women who have been raised in Korean households, but grown up in Western societies such as Australia. These include being a good wife, being a good mother, and being a good daughter. However, there are a growing number of young women not wanting to be a mother or a wife to focus on their career. And this has caused some tension between the older generation's expectations and the younger generation's beliefs and values. This is a good question. How can we resolve these differences and what can we expect moving forward? Would anybody like to have a go at answering that one? Yeah, Ms. Kwon?
Okay, I mentioned before, having a children, not having a children is actually personal choice. And like when I was 30 years old, my mother was worrying about I couldn't get married because I didn't have any boyfriend since I came to Australia, and I didn't have any date. So yeah, the older generation, they're worrying about more continuing of the family. So forming a family or having a children. But nowadays, even I'm talking to my staff, having a family or having a baby is not on their agenda at all. So they are not interested in that issue anymore. So it could bring the problem in the family, especially we are migrant, and my mom and dad, they're actually quite old-fashioned because they came Australia 25 years old. What they're thinking is back in 20 years ago. But my children grew up here. They are actually very Western thinking they're having. So it can cause a problem. But what I like to say here is choose what you like to do. That's do not compromise. Yes, so if you have your own priority, you should have your own thought, and you should actually working on it.
Would anybody else like to, thank you, Ms. Kwon, would anybody else like to add their comments?
Yeah, I like statistics. So, the demographic profiles change it, and also family structure change it. So Korea, so of course Australia, but so now 1 out of 3 women living alone. So that means, and they don't want to marry, they don't want to, so in Korea, I can see that there is a change of expectation from parents' generation, because, daughters, they don't want to marry, they don't want to, childbearing. So this demographic change and patterns of family structure change, that definitely will affect the way of the older generations thinking. So yeah, that's the statistics of it.
Thank you for those statistics. We are running out of time, so I'm going to say a big thank you to all of our panelists, and I'd now like to hand over to Yvonne Kim from the Asia Society in Korea to do some closing remarks. Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Ms. Cha, Ms. Kwon, and Dr. Jung for your valuable insights. A big thanks to the Ambassador for Gender Equality for her wonderful opening statement. And most importantly, I would like to thank Liz and the Australia-Korea Business Council for co-hosting today's event. And of course, I am so proud of my Asia Society colleagues in Australia for putting together another successful webinar on such important topic. Although circumstances have changed rapidly with the coronavirus outbreak, the technology has allowed us to bring ourselves together in more ways than we could have imagined. In that regard, we also had the ambassadors of Switzerland, Bangladesh, and Rwanda to Korea among the audience with us today. Your Excellencies, thank you so much for taking your time to join, and hope that you'll participate in more of our global events. Thank you to all of you for joining us today from all around the globe. I hope you enjoyed today's event, and I very much hope to be able to see you again in person very soon. Please stay safe, and goodbye.